Hello, everyone. My name is Limor. I'm a product manager at Salesforce, and I'm very, very excited to be here today and to talk to you about the customer voice in B2B products and why it's so important to combine the customer voice in every step of the product planning. So a short intro. First thing about me is the fact that I'm located in Israel. I want to mention that because I really want to explain that I had opportunity to work with customers and partners around the globe, whether if it's in the US, in EMEA, in Australia. And it was important for me to say that there is no big difference between talking to customers in different regions. So it's pretty much the same, just for you to be aware of that. In terms of education, I have a BSc in Industrial Engineering and Management, and I have also have an MBA. I've started my first position as a product manager back in 2013. While I needed to gather some requirements and to prioritize requirements for one of the systems we wanted to integrate with in our group. And basically, that's when I realized that the next position and what I need to do in life is to become a product manager. And I looked for my first product management position. So what are we going to talk about today? So first thing that I would like to talk about is really about the differences between B2B and B2C products in the way we interact with customers, in the way customers influence, and why we have those differences. I think that it's also important for new product managers or for product managers who want to have this transition between B2C to B2B, just for you to have some kind of expectations for what's coming and what are those differences between these two different types of product, because it will really influence the way you work, your daily work, and also the way you plan. And so it's very good to be aware of that. Then I really would like to talk about the product planning cycle and to talk about the main stages in the cycle and how we can combine the customer voice in every step and why it's so important to combine the customer voice in every step. And finally, some key takeaways, some tips from me that I gathered during the years, and I really hope that you find it helpful for you one day. So B2C versus B2B and why it's so different. So the first thing that I would like to talk about, and again, there are many differences, obviously, between B2B and B2C, some of it related to how we interact with customers, some are completely different, and I just would like to focus main four here. So the first thing is the influence method. That's the way I called it. But basically, when I talk about the influence method, I talk about the fact that unlike in B2C, when the way we experience customers is really with user funnels, with analytics, with numbers, when we analyze number of clicks or how much time users spend in a certain application or in a certain page, in B2B, we have always direct discussions with customers. We really, really communicate with these customers. We meet with them face-to-face. We meet with them, online more these days. But basically, there is a direct interaction between customers and product managers. Even if you're not talking with all of your customers, or even if not necessarily doing that directly, but it can be via different channels. So, for example, customers can reach out to customer success or to professional services, and then eventually you will hear about their challenges, you will hear about their requirements. They can also have other ways to communicate, and we will talk about that a little bit later, but that's like the major difference. Direct discussions versus analytics. Another thing is really not just the influence method, it's not just the how, but it's also the when. In B2C products, we can analyze the data and how customers interact with the products only after we implemented something. We can really trace it once it's there. In B2B products, we can communicate and we can really interact with customers ahead of time, even years before we want to start working on a new product or a new tool. We can really involve them in discussions when we build our roadmap. So this can happen way before we start implementation. The next thing is really the level of involvement. So as I said, since we don't have direct interactions with customers in B2B and B2C products, the level of involvement is a little bit different. When we're talking about B2B, customers can be much more involved if we have some early adopters, or if we have some customers that we know that have a very special interest in a certain feature. We can share with them some mock-ups. We can talk to them about specific features, so that can be very helpful. I will talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but obviously they can be much more involved. It has advantages. It has also a little bit some disadvantages, and we need to be aware of that. But I will talk about that as well. Expertise is also a huge difference. In most of the cases, or usually in B2B products, your customers are the experts of their domain. They are the experts in their in the area that you're currently working on. So again, as I said, in most cases. So it can give you the amazing opportunity to really learn from them about their business, about their workflows, about market trends that they want to implement. And then eventually you can become the expert by yourself. Once you're the expert, you are the go-to person in your organization for what customers would like to implement, how they work, what are their expectations. So this is something that you can benefit a lot from, and that's tip number one for me. Become the expert by yourself. And the last thing is really the decision makers here. Unlike in B2C, in B2B products, the people who make the decision to purchase licenses of a specific system and to implement it are obviously not the end users. What you can expect from it is sometimes a lower adoption rate at the beginning than what you think. If we're talking about new implementations, end-use product managers would like to speak a little bit with end users and to understand what is their experience, to understand what were their challenges in the previous system solution they integrated with. They may not be engaged at the beginning. Again, this is just something that you need to be aware of, because obviously, at the end of the day, we need adoption of the end users as well to make sure that our product is successful. Just you need to be aware of that you also need to make sure that they are adopted properly. And sometimes it means that we need to work on more features that will increase the adoptions for end users, and that they will understand and learn what are the benefits of this system. Also, the end users need to understand the benefits that they get and why the system is much better than what they had in the past. Okay. So let's talk about the product planning main stages. Well, obviously, you can break these stages down into a lot of other stages as well, but I really wanted to focus only on the main four, as I see it, in terms of the customer voice and how we can combine it. So we have the analysis stage, the design, the implementation, and finally, the release. Let's start with the analysis phase. So I've decided to divide it into like two main sections. First is everything that is related to the analysis at a planning stage. If we're talking about roadmap planning, or if we're talking about a planning of specific feature. And also we can talk about the feature usage analysis. I will focus on the planning side, but obviously feature usage is another thing that we need to analyze, but it's more related to the release stage. I will say a few words about that as well. So first thing is surveys. We can have internal and external surveys in order to really help us prioritize better. Internal basically means that we can send survey to Internal stakeholders, they can be from professional services, they can be solution architects, solution engineers, customer success, basically people who interact with customers. And if we want to ask about specific feature, if we want to, for example, send a survey that will eventually help us prioritize our roadmap better, this is also something that we can do. And again, this is how we hear the customer voice once we decide to have the roadmap planning. So that's a great example of how you can combine the customer voice. Another thing is, of course, customer interviews. So customer interviews can be done for general things. For example, you can interview a customer to understand how the implementation process went, or you can interview customers if you really in the investigation process of a certain tool or a certain feature, or while you're working on a certain feature. It's always good to have direct discussions with customers and to schedule direct meetings with them. I know that in a lot of companies, there is a difference between inbound product management and outbound product management, and that outbound are really the people who talk to customers directly. So what you can do is that if you have specific questions, you can always reach out to your outbound team and to really ask them to conduct these interviews, or to have this research for you, and to have like a closed list of questions, things that you would like to know. But also you can ask to join some of these interviews. That could be very helpful as well. Customer ideas or customer requests is also a great way to really gather more requirements from customers. Basically, that's like an amazing opportunity for customers to raise topics, to raise their own requirements. Other customers or other internal stakeholders can vote and also can raise their own requests. And basically, you can always look at the customer ideas that you have, the customer requests, and prioritize them. Obviously, things that a lot of people vote for, or basically topics that are raised a lot of times. Obviously, these things can be very, very good candidates for your roadmap. Future scoring, we also look at the customer impact and how features will impact the customers once we give a score for features when we are planning our roadmap. So there are a lot of ways to score features basically when we plan our roadmap, and this is a different topic to discuss, but I would just like to mention that when we're doing a score, when we really calculate a score for features, we can look at different parameters, and there are a lot of different ways to do that. But obviously, no matter which parameters you choose and how you decide to really give a score for your features and to prioritize your features, looking at the customer impact is something that is very important. We can sometimes talk about reach, which is like how many users this feature will impact, or how many customers can be impacted by this feature, but also to try and really measure the impact that customer is going to have from this feature is something that is very important to combine. When you give a score for each of your features. So again, customer impact parameter needs to be there. A large customers influence. So in B2B products, we always have the large customers that really look for a specific tool, or really look for a specific feature and solution for something. And again, since they pay a lot, they really expect these features to be done. So what I can say about large customers influence is a few things. But first, it's amazing to have customers that are involved and that you can have discussions with, that they can help you really design your features better. So this is a very, very good thing. What you need to remember is that once you get the requirements from this large customer, or from these large customers, you always need to still continue investigating and make sure that you're not building a solution that is very specific for their use case, but that you build something generic enough to fit a lot of other customers. So this is something that is very important to remember. Another thing, and that's like the disadvantage that I said, is that sometimes you have a certain plan, a certain prioritization, and then a very big customers comes along and you need to change everything. Again, this is a disadvantage. On the other hand, you can say that we're agile and we always need to change our roadmap based on what happens in the market and based on our strategy and our priorities at the company. So it's not a bad thing, but this is something that you need to be aware of. If you're moving to B2B, these things can happen, that large customers really make some changes in your prioritization because they have features that are more critical for them and that they want to be released first. Workshops is also a good way to interact with customers. Usually workshops are being handled by professional services teams or customer success or implementers. Workshops can be anything. It can be a workshop that you conduct on a very specific topic, but it can be an implementation workshop, for example. And although you're not managing it, and although you probably don't want to participate the entire time, it's good sometimes to ask to be involved in specific sessions related to your topic, because then you can really hear what are the requirements, you can intervene with your questions, you can make sure that they understand the benefits or that they understand what they can do with the product. But mainly, this is a great opportunity to ask questions around this area if it's relevant and if you have the chance to do that. Users research. So user research is something that usually is conducted by the UX team, but obviously you can join these sessions, and if you're not joining the sessions, you can really add your questions or things that are in your interest to these sessions to make sure that they are part of this research. Basically, these things are done if you want to really present some mockups to customers and you just want to get some feedback. So what you can do is really to have some mockups that can be initial mockups, and you can conduct some customers discussions and to ask about specific mockups, specific pages, specific interactions. Again, usually this is something that is led by the UX team, but it's good for you to be part of it, at least to be aware of what they're going to investigate, and of course to be aware of the results. Feature usage. Feature usage is something that is not necessarily specific to B2B products, but obviously this is another way for you to analyze how end users interact with your product. So obviously we have analytics. Analytics can be whatever you want. It can be interaction. It can be how many users or how many customers adopt specific features. User testing obviously is part of it. You release a feature and then you want to see how end users interact with it. This is also something that is done by the UX team. Final thing is really interviews. They can be part of the user testing or they can happen after. It's really when we want to get feedback. It can be from end users, but it can be also from business users to really understand what they feel about the product, what is the level of engagement they get from end users, what is their feedback. It's also, again, amazing feedback to get at any time. But just to mention that, again, as I said, user testing and interviews usually for the usage can be done by a different team and you can participate. So that's for the analysis. Let's move to talk about why it's so important. So why the customer voice is so important, especially the analysis phase, because it really helps you understand what you need to do, why you need to do it, how, and also when. So what basically means that it helps you understand where we should focus. Once you know what customers want, what is critical for them, what are their biggest challenges, it's easier for you to understand what should be the focus, what you need to do in the next few releases. Why? Super important. If you don't understand the customer challenges and their business problems, you can't really build features that help them solve these problems. So it's super critical to start with that and to understand what is the business problems that your customers try to solve. The how, once you really understand what customers look for and what are their biggest issues and what they struggle with, it's really easy for you to build features that fit their use cases and their business workflows. So you really want to make sure that when you design things, you are aware of their use cases and how they plan to use the feature. The one, obviously, when you're aware of the problems that they have and how much this challenge is severe, and how much it's critical to be solved, it's help you understanding where it should be prioritized. So it basically means when eventually you're going to build this feature. Let's move to the design. So when I talk to about design, there are a few things that I would like to mention. So first, you can always share mock-ups and designs with customers. As I said, it can be with early adopters or with specific customers that you know that are very interested in a specific feature. You can really schedule dedicated meetings with them to share with them some mock-ups and designs and get feedback. At this stage, you can get a lot of super important feedback ahead of time. So this is something that if you have the option to do that, it can be very, very beneficial for you. Product requirements, obviously, is part of the design. You need to write requirements. There are some things that really important to add at your product requirements that they really explain the customer voice, or they are basically the interpretation of the customer voice. You can include the business problem, what are the challenges, what are their use cases or main use cases that are pretty common for this feature, what are the jobs that eventually the end users performs, and what is the business impact of this feature. It's super important to include it in your requirements for two main reasons. One is because it helps you stay in focus. It helps you concentrate on the most critical things when you really need to prioritize items that are related to the feature or to the tool you're currently building. And it's also important to share that with R&D, and I will talk about it in a second. Functional priorities. So once you have a better level of understanding of what customers look for and what are their most common use cases and challenges, it's much easier to prioritize your epics within this feature in a much easier way. Everything is much more intuitive once you have the level of understanding of what needs to be done and what is more critical. And this is something that you can achieve only by having those direct discussions with customers and with internal stakeholders. Implementation stage. So we talked about the product requirements and what should be in those requirements, which leads me to this point, which is the need to expose R&D to the business impact. So basically, the second reasons for including the customer voice, use cases, challenges, all these kind of things that I've mentioned earlier in the product requirements is also because these things needs to be exposed to R&D. And it needs to be exposed to R&D because, again, once they understand the business impact of what they're building, they will have a much higher motivation for building this specific feature because they understand why it's so important, they understand the impact of it. So this is, for me, tip number 2. Really expose R&D as much as you can to the business needs, to discussions that you had with customers, what customers had to say. It really increases the motivation. Another thing to mention is the fact that once they are aware of the bigger picture and the challenges and the use cases, it's easier for them to build it because it's easier for them to think about edge cases, to challenge you, to do pushbacks if it's relevant. The entire discussion with R&D is much fruitful once they understand the business impact and the business needs. So what I do is the beginning of each release, I really try to schedule some time just to go over the business justification, the business reasons for this feature, and to talk a little bit about some customer stories or use cases, or give some updates of the late discussions that I had with customers. I find it very useful, and I got good feedback from R&D on that. So that's a tip from me to you. If you would like to do it, I think that it can be very, very helpful for you as well, and for them also. Another thing related to implementation. So obviously, when we're in the implementation phase, we need to prioritize on a daily basis, sometimes a few times a day. But we really need to prioritize what are the user stories we're going to do in each sprint, or if we don't have time to do everything that we wanted to do in the sprint, what is more important, or maybe what can be removed, which scenario is less relevant, or what can be removed even in the specific user story. You always need to stay in focus, and we always need to prioritize. Once we have a better level of understanding and we have the customer voice in our head all the time, and we understand what customers really try to achieve with this product and what we really need to deliver, it's super helpful, because then the daily prioritization that you need to do are much easier for you as well. So that's another very important thing to remember. So the release phase. The release phase, as I see it, we have two main important things to remember. First thing is the pilots. So pilots is something that you can do in order to get feedback really like at the last minute before you go GA. So if you want, you can do it on a very, very close group of customers. You can pick these customers that you know that they are willing to share, that you know that you have good discussions with them, customers that are willing to have a certain cadence with you, and maybe on a weekly basis, to really have discussions and to provide a real and honest feedback. So this is something that can be very, very helpful for you, and you can learn a lot from it. It's just important to remember that you need to have some kind of you need to set expectations, because they need to be aware of what is expected from them once they participate in the pilot. And of course, what you try to achieve in this pilot, it's also important for you to be aware of the fact that what you really want to ask, what you want to test, and what you want to learn from it, what can be changed based of the feedback that you get in this pilot. And of course, it needs to be limited in a certain time period. Also, you need to define if you want it to be done only in sandbox, if you want it to be done only in production. Pilots can be whatever you define that the pilot will be, but it's important for the customer to be aware of what's going to be part of it and what are the expectations from them. And this is something that you need to define carefully. Finally, success stories, things that are more related to product marketing and those kind of things. But if obviously success stories and customers that have implemented a certain tool or a certain product or a feature can really become the amazing marketing tool for you, these success stories. So obviously, during the way, you will get some questions from the marketing team of if there are some customers that implemented the product, they are very, very happy, they had some discussions with you, and they are willing to talk and to share their great experience so that other customers would like to implement that as well. So if you really have good discussions with these customers, you can really recommend on customers that will be willing to do that. So again, this is also something that you can help with once you have direct discussions with customers and you're aware of their success stories. Another thing to mention is the ongoing discussions. So we can talk about discussions with customers on very specific features, or if we really want to investigate a specific topic. But obviously, ongoing discussions that you have in the company is something that is very good to have, and it's something that can be very helpful to participate. So internal advisory board is something that if you don't have at your company, maybe it's something that it's good for you to start doing. What you can do is to have some kind of cadence of meetings with some internal stakeholders, people that are willing to have these meetings. They can be, solution architects. They can be people from customer success. They can be from professional services. They can be other product managers. But basically, it's a good opportunity to raise topics and to ask questions and to ask the team and to get feedback. And it's also a great opportunity for them to raise topics that they faced with recently that customers really talk to them about. So it's a great way to have ongoing discussions about customer needs internally in the company. So if you don't have that today, I suggest to think of scheduling those meetings. A customer advisory board. So not all companies have customer advisory boards, but if you have customer advisory boards, again, basically we're talking about meetings in a certain cadence that the company have with certain customers, usually large customers or early adopters or customers that really lead the market trends. If you can join these discussions and really listen to the most important topics that are raised there, it's good. You can also decide and ask to join these sessions and to raise your topics and just to see who are the customers that are interested in a specific topic or specific feature, and then to schedule another separate meeting just with this customer to have a follow-up discussion. So it's also a very, very, very good opportunity to have more interactions with customers. Conferences. I really hope that soon we will all be able to go to conferences once this entire COVID situation will be over. But obviously, conferences, it's an amazing opportunity to interact with customers. We're not just talking about your opportunity to share and to present new capabilities to your customers, but you can also schedule direct meetings because you know that customers are there. You can always have interactions and near the demo booth and to really have some small discussions about areas and ask questions that you're interested in. And another thing that you can do is, again, depends on the conference and how much you can influence the sessions. But what I did once is really had a smaller discussions with a few customers around a certain area. We ran an online survey, basically, with Kahoot and presented the answers to everyone. It was very nice because it basically raised a discussion with all the people in the room, and each of these people really raised the topic, and other people responded how they deal with the situation today, or what are their needs in their industry or in their region. And that was very, very good because basically we had a very, very good discussion. So it's also, again, a good opportunity to engage with customers. So also this is something that you can do. And of course, any opportunity for a discussion can be helpful, whether if it's customer visits. These days it's more online, but hopefully post-COVID, you will be able to go and visit your customers and talk to them directly. So if you have the opportunity to join some visits that you're having at the company or to schedule your visits, it's always good to have this face-to-face interaction and to join any periodic customer meetings that you have at your company. Again, it's good to hear what customers are talking about, but also to raise your own topics. So just you can then have some follow-up discussions with relevant customers that are interested in those specific topics that you want to investigate. So some key takeaways, just to summarize what I've talked about. So again, tip number one, engage with your customers as much as possible, really in every opportunity you have. Build good relationships with your customers. It will help you not just for success stories, but also for later investigations that you're gonna have. So it's good to build those relationships so that you can ask customers to really have interviews and to have meetings on other topics that you will investigate later. So it's always good to have good relationships with them. once you really understand the customer voice, you can become the expert by yourself and become the customer voice in your organization and present the customers better in your organization. So this is something that will be very, very good for you to do. It can really benefit. It gives a lot of benefits for you once you really understand the customers and you're the expert. So that's something that I can tell you, super helpful. Try to do that if you can. And of course, participate in internal and external work groups and advisory boards that you have, and really, really try to eventually expose R&D once you gather all this information to the business as much as you can. I really hope that you enjoy this session. If you have more questions or if you would like to connect, just feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. And I'm very, very excited to be here today. And feel free to reach out. Thank you.